There was movement at the station, for the word had passed around that the colt from Old Regret had got away and had joined the wild bush horses. He was worth £1,000, so all the cracks had gathered to the fray.
For the 9 candidates contesting this seat in the March 13th election, Paterson is so politically unpredictable that the outcome could be determined by as little as 3 dozen votes.
Malcolm Mackerras, the political pundit, on his famous pendulum, puts the margin at 0.01 of 1%, and this makes this seat the most marginal presently in Australia. And obviously it's that marginality, if there's such a word, that in fact contributes to the interest from the media and from the politicians.
Since the election date was announced a month ago, 4 government ministers and 5 shadow ministers have visited the electorate. Among the visitors, opposition leader John Hewson and Prime Minister Paul Keating. And while the politicians are looking to the 73,000 voters in this electorate for indications of how the rest of Australia will react at the ballot box, people in Paterson are still not sure what they're looking for. So the question remains, who can define that something different and act upon it for the people of Paterson and Australia? It's this community disillusionment with both the Labor government and the coalition that Natural Law Party candidate Ian MacDonald cites as one of his reasons for standing. The rough and tumble world of politics isn't the only thing that could do with some harmony, according to the 40-year-old agricultural economist. Natural law, he says, is about restoring orderliness to all of society through a series of programs such as meditation. And instead of concentrating on the symptoms of a problem, the focus should be on the cause. In the tranquil shadows of the Gloucester buckets, Ron Franks is hoping for radical change in Australian government. The 47-year-old father of 5 is standing as a candidate for the Confederate Action Party, or CAP, although he is reluctant. The Confederate Action Party has a page full of promises, ranging from giving citizens the right to own firearms to abolishing the Aboriginal Affairs Department and reintroducing the death penalty. But one of the party's key elements, according to Mr Franks, is the idea of citizen-introduced referenda, giving the people the right to override government decisions.
Most people, when approached, agree with 90% of our promise. And if we have 90% of our promise succeed, it's going to be so much further ahead than what we are now, especially with the other major parties not attempting to do anything about these things, the issues.
I'd like to ask more information on the GST.
Why is that? Why would you want to know more?
I've got a friend in New Zealand, he said it's not good over there, so there's not enough information going around about, like in Australia, how it would affect it, plus the incidents over in Canada.
No, I don't think the GST has been well explained. I think if it's better explained, I think people would be well aware, made to accept it, you know.
Make it easier to employ more people, like more subsidies and things like that. Yeah.
Since the last 10 years, we've had a fringe benefit tax, we've had a capital gains tax. Every small businessman is standing there shaking in his shoes, waiting for a taxation order to walk through his doors. What I'm asking you is, what are you going to do for us to help us expand our business and grow in profit so that we can employ more people?
Probably employment would be the biggest issue.
Basically just unemployment and how they're going to fix it up. I mean, it's a mess because there's a lot of young kids out there who just left school. There's nothing for them.
Well, I think the farmers have got to be looked after because they've been downtrodden. They haven't got a foot to stand on. They need help. They're not. As a matter of fact, I don't think they get enough subsidising from the government.
The Tomago aluminium smelter is the largest smelter in Australia and one of the biggest in the world. A $700 million expansion building a third potline has given the company a huge boost in production capability. It will provide an extra 140,000 tonnes of aluminium each year, increasing capacity to 380,000 tonnes.
This is a long-term investment. Gradually over the coming years, older plants in the world will close, and there is natural growth in demand in the world for aluminium.
Already, the company exports about 85% of its product, especially to the Asia-Pacific region, worth about $500 million. It took more than 1,000 men less than 2 years to build the new potline. An extra 200 workers are needed to run it. 1,200 people all up on the smelter site. The extra capacity means extra work across the Hunter.
There will be a further 2,400 jobs in the wider Hunter region, coal mining, power generation, trucking, the port and so on.
The new potline was originally greeted with concern from the local community, worried about possible pollution effects. The company says since then they've not heard from any protesters. The Premier, John Fahey, will open the new line on Friday.
Navy. For 6 years, Cowan Engineering has been working on the project, owner Bob Cowan selling his house and putting his life savings into the plan. But all that has now paid off. In the face of US competition and government legislation encouraging companies to buy America, this small Lake Macquarie company has taken on the multinationals and won.
Well, sitting in the halls of Washington for this little guy from Warners Bay was absolutely terrifying, I can assure you. But again, you just find your way through it. But we had the product everyone was interested in.
The work will almost double the workforce of 18 at the workshop and will create spin-offs for more than 30 local companies. The plant at Warners Bay will also undergo a $500,000 expansion, and already there's been interest from other countries to supply the chambers. But what is disheartening for Bob Cowan is that in the last 6 years he has received little help from the Australian government, and he's struggling to be recognised as a potential tenderer to build chambers for the Australian Navy.
Unfortunately, being a small business, and we've got to remember that Australia is built of small businesses, it's very difficult to get support out of the government.
Jodie McKay, NBN News.
The driver of the Coffs Harbour-owned truck claims he saw the car approaching on the wrong side of the road around 1:30 this morning. He told police he was unable to avoid a collision, the northbound white Laser slamming into the prime mover directly under the driver's seat. The truck driver was uninjured, but there was little hope for the car driver, 45-year-old William Lewis from Southport in Queensland. It took SES personnel and police an hour to free Mr Lewis's body. Investigations into the crash are continuing. Meanwhile, rail traffic is back to normal after a level crossing crash at Taree at about 10 this morning. A Toyota Land Cruiser, believed to be driven by a well-known Taree identity, was caught in the path of a goods train on the Bushland Drive rail crossing. The 54-year-old driver of the vehicle was taken to the Manning Base Hospital suffering cuts to the head.
The local side took the game right up to the boys from Marconi, trying to match them skill for skill. During the first half, Coffs Harbour continually bombarded their opposition's goal. Finally, they broke through. The Marconi goalie just couldn't get his fingertips to a high ball. It didn't take long for the Greens to strike back. From there, the locals lost touch. Marconi ran away with the game, finishing up winners 5-1. The game was also a welcome home for local referee Mark Hawthorne. Mark spent last season controlling national games and looks set to be a permanent top-grade ref. Despite some hard driving, Newcastle driver Wayne Stoddard was beaten by just 3 seconds in the final of the Formula A. Victorian driver Remo Luciano took out the Manufacturers' Cup in a race that was undecided right to the end. Teams from across the world made the trip to Coffs for the meeting, most of them using the championships to get the bugs out of their machines before the start of the European competition next week. Some of these little carts are just centimetres off the ground and topping speeds in excess of 160 kilometres an hour.
Cleaning and servicing rail locos is a dirty business. 200 of the engines pass through the Broadmeadow depot each day. In the past, attempts have been made to collect the runoff water and sludge, barrelling it for liquid disposal sites in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. 2 years ago, a pipe broke, spilling thousands of litres of waste diesel oil into nearby waterways. Freight Rail was fined but took the lesson to heart.
It's time that we looked at waste disposal at its source, and that's what's attempted here at Broadmeadow.
Absorbent rolls have been laid along tracks to sop up small spills. Concrete channels and weirs were installed to eliminate any chance of seepage into creeks and drains. But the real breakthroughs have come by separating oil and sludge from runoff water. The waste oil can be collected and sold. The sludge is left to settle in a biofarm. Nature takes over, microbes breaking down the sludge left to dry in the sun.
The sand oil mixture is broken down very easily by the addition of good old sunlight, moisture and oxygen.
It's hoped the soil will be used as landfill or road base. Other industries have shown interest in the process. Andrew Lobb, NBN News.
It was very, very compacted, and it's highly unlikely those at the bottom would have got out by themselves anyway.
Oh no, that's not mine.
Whose torch was that? It shines on you, that's your bright, so it goes to your head. Try to handle them as little as you can, just steer them on their way.
Federal Minister Ros Kelly agreed to help purchase Fame Cove in the marginal seat of Patterson just before the federal election was announced. She wanted the state and federal governments to share the cost of acquiring the peninsula for public use. In a letter sent on the 12th of February, the state government asked for clarification on a number of points, including the future cost of managing the land and whether that could also be shared. So far, Minister Kelly has not responded. The Friends of Fame Cove say an answer is desperately needed. The land will be auctioned in 2 weeks if a government response is not received. In a media release sent to NBN, Environment Minister Chris Hartcher says the environmental credibility of the federal government is on the line over Fame Cove, and they cannot continue to stall until after March 13. Late this afternoon, a spokesperson for Minister Kelly said that a response is being drafted and will be sent straight away. He said the federal government still supports the purchasing of Fame Cove and will work towards resolving the costing issue. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
For the candidates, it was a perfect opportunity to share their educational policies with those most affected. Lining up for the debate, sitting member Alan Morris, Liberal candidate Glenn Turner, representing the Greens James Whelan, Louina Jackson for the Democratic Socialists and Democrat candidate Greg Baines. After their 10-minute speech, there was time for questions from the floor. It was the Coalition's goods and services tax that raised the most concern.
There just seems to be a lot of perhapses and ifs and buts and whys. Why?
The GST is a tax on consumption. Unless it is zero rated or tax exempt, you can assume there's going to be a GST on it.
Students say they're worried about funding plans. Under a coalition government, they believe the future of Oz study is threatened, and under Labor, they cite broken promises like the HECS fee staying below the CPI. Melinda Smith, NBN News.
Lake Macquarie Mayor Doug Carley was not at last night's council meeting. According to a council spokesperson, he's taking time off because of a medical condition. Deputy Mayor Laurie Manning took the chair. However, Alderman Carley's absence caused bitter fighting between aldermen.
But when you're talking about the mayor, the so-called leader of the city, I think there's some certain questions that need to be answered.
Independent Mark Booth asked a number of questions, including why the mayor's car phone had been changed a number of times, his use of a council van, and if Alderman Carley was an Australian citizen. Alderman Booth also referred to what he termed the secrecy surrounding Alderman Carley.
The more secrecy that the mayor surrounds himself with, the more questions that we have to ask. And not only do we ask on our own behalf, we ask on behalf of the city.
A fiery clash broke out when Alderman Booth was asked to be quiet and Alderman Shields given the floor.
You allowed him to speak, Mrs. Deputy Mayor,
Alderman Shields.
And you were still on the same question, so I'll keep going if you don't mind. And you can stand, throw me out. You allowed him to speak, he was on the same subject. Oh, what a joke. What a joke.
Alderman Booth stormed from the meeting, escorted by fellow independent Alan Davis. Outside, he said he believed the city deserves some answers about the mayor's behaviour.
We need some proper answers from the mayor himself. So many questions have been asked lately, but the mayor surrounds himself in secrecy. That only begs more questions.
Alderman Booth later returned to the meeting. Mayor Carley was unavailable for comment today. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
ANA Flugel is touring Australia before Japan's new National Soccer League starts in May. The Breakers scored first through a skillful pass, but before half-time, Flugel struck back. Brazilian star of the 80s, Edu, showed he has lost none of his class with this cracking free kick which tied the score at 1-1. The second half, and Newcastle came out firing in the downpour. Two late goals clinched the match for the home side, but ANA were not disgraced in one of the team's first outings. Australia's own National League resumes in 2 weeks after the World Youth Championship. The Breakers have an outside chance of making the top 6 if they win their last 3 games. In the curtain raiser last night, Adamstown Rosebud defeated ANA's B side 2-0.